the day I got back, I saw this in the paper. Tank rolls into the city. So you know where I was the next day. In fact, there were several people here. Doug Riley was there. Tom Posnow was there. There was a half a dozen of our, and he's way in the back, okay. And it turned out quite well. Adam Akos wrote a book on his tank gunner in Cologne. You can switch that now. That's the Sun. This tank came from Gettysburg, and I talked to the owner, and I said, you know, this is nice if we can get the speaker here and get the tank here. And I talked, and I said, can we put a tank in a church parking lot? He said, well, if you put the Christian banner on it, I think we can do it. And then I heard of the guy that owns it, and I said, is there any way we could do this? He said, yeah, if you got $2,500. I said, no, we don't have that kind of budget. But we're going to work on it. And that's the tank. It's the Sherman tank. And it was right in front of the Midtown. It has rubber treads on it. But they brought it up on a lowboy. And amazing to see it. If you could switch the next one. There we go. That's on my left is Adam Akos. He's the fellow that wrote the book. The fellow on the right is Clarence Moyer. He is the gunner in the tank. And the fellow in the back needs a haircut. It's a story, it's actually filmed by the military. All military film. It's amazing. You got the tank battle in Cologne, and and the book is signed too, yes. And I'll get to that in a second. But they got in the tank battle, and they knocked out the Panzer tank, and the Germans jumped out, and they ran. And there was a car going down the street that ran off to the side. And Clarence says, you know, I think I hit that car inadvertently, and there was a young lady in the car. And he's never forgotten that. And she died. They couldn't stop. They were in the battle. But later on, he went back to Cologne, and he met the family and became close friends. So there's a happy ending to it. I had the good fortune of having Adam and Clarence sign the book, first copy. And I did that for a reason. Do we have another slide? How about the cover of this book? Do you have that? There it is. Spearhead, Adam Akos. It's actually from Williamsport, and he wrote this book. It's an amazing, amazing story. Clarence lives in the Lehighton area, the World War II veteran. We're talking to him about coming and sharing his story with us, minus the tank. And he's the one that's illegal up there. As you guys in combat know, you cannot be in combat without a helmet. But I guess he's always getting his picture taken. You want to make sure he got a good shot. So here's the whole deal. He went to Williamsport the next day and sold books. He said he'd make a commitment to us that Clarence could come. We'll have to work on the tank. However, when I got back from vacation, Sherry Whitmoyer called me. Sherry sits in this pew with her son Austin. He's in a wheelchair. I think you might all remember Austin. Austin was in critical condition at the Reading Hospital. We sent our best wishes and everything else. I followed up a week later. He's home, but with his condition, muscular dystrophy, he doesn't have the strength for the lungs. So it's a very touchy situation. In fact, they put a band around him to help him breathe. And when he got out, they didn't give it to him. It's $10,000. I don't see how they do that. But I followed up. He said he's doing better. And I sent him an email and said, hey, buddy, it's not the same. You're not here. So the whole thing about this is, that's the book And I think it would be a good idea if the people here would sign that book. It would mean a lot to him, and it would mean a lot to you. So I have the book. Kirk, the president, signs it first. I signed it, and then we have white pages in the front and the back. And if you could be kind enough, those who would be willing to do it, after the meeting, come down and sign the book. And then we'll take it down to Reading and give it to him. He knows nothing about this. So that's our project. So if you can help us, come down and sign the book after the meeting. I don't want any more from May. We have another opportunity here. I got a letter from the Eisenhower Foundation at Gettysburg, the Eisenhower Institute, excuse me. You may remember we had a fellow here a couple of years ago by the name of David Tuck, a Holocaust survivor. And a young girl from there, a young lady, called and said, Mr. Lloyd, I promised we'd have a Holocaust program and I can't find anybody. Well, we got David, he went there, and my wife and I went down. 1,000 people showed up.
Wow.
It was amazing. And now I get this letter from the Eisenhower Institute at Gettysburg College. And they're having a symposium on March the 30th. For you people, or any people here that are interested in going, I'm not going to miss it, is an all-day symposium, 8:30 in the morning, like 3:30 in the afternoon at Gettysburg College. And they're going to have, for speakers, they're going to have Dr. George Colburn, Dr. Grace Simmons, and Dr. John McManus. And if you Google these people, they've got a tremendous background. So if you're looking for front page people that know what they're talking about, there's the place to go. I'd definitely be there, and a lot of the people on the board are going to go as well. I have it here. If you want a copy of it, come and get it. I talked to the program manager this afternoon. He said it's open to the public, but it's pre-registration, so you have to put your money in first to get it. And it closes next Friday. So I have some copies here. If you're interested, come and see me, and we can get you into that. Now, for the highlight of the evening, are you going to do this? Yeah, I thought you would. You do it for me? Barb Spaventa is going to introduce our guest speaker tonight, who had to spend a couple of hours of me today in the car on the way back from Levittown. And you put up with me. Thank you, Barb.
It is with great pleasure today that I'm here to introduce a remarkable lady. I first met aboard the John W. Brown, SS John W. Brown, on the 75th anniversary Liberty Cruise, where I approached her to ask if she was indeed a real riveter. She spared not a second before flexing her muscle and saying, well, yes, indeed she was. During the Second World War, where soldiers were hauled away to serve, women filled many jobs at the home front. And one job that played a pivotal role in winning the war for the U.S. was that of the riveters. As May will attest to, any flyboy, they never lost a plane due to a bad rivet. These ladies worked long, hard hours building the very planes that inevitably helped us win the war. This is one of the reasons, as May will tell you, she has been working tirelessly to get them honored with the Congressional Gold Medal, something they definitely deserve and we hope they get. If any of you were fortunate enough to have attended the World War II Oral History Club in Columbia in September this past year, you would have heard her story. And for those who have not, she is here tonight to tell you all about it. It is an honor to introduce a real Rosie the Riveter, my friend and hero, Miss May Krier.
Hey, Rose, you might be honored. Fill up your hair. Okay. you're going to be an honorary Rosie.
Thank you, Ben.
Going up here. Are you done with me now?
Yes.
Do I need the mic to do that? No. I'm wired now. Am I all right? Okay. My name is May Krier. I'm from Levittown, Pennsylvania, but I worked at Boeing in Seattle, Washington during World War II. I built B-17s and B-29s, and I'm very proud of the role I played. But first thing I want to tell you, last year in February, the Air Force invited me down to Florida to Cape Canaveral to the heavy rocket launch. And they had a symposium and a STEM meeting, and they asked me to speak. They wanted me to come to inspire the younger generation. And as I stood up there and looked around, which I'm looking around today, none of you, or most of you, weren't even born when I was building the B-17s. It's amazing, isn't it? I know many of you were, but many of you weren't. My story starts with, we were born during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl in the Middle West. I was born in North Dakota, and we really struggled through, and I don't think there's very many people realize what that did to our country at the time. We worked really hard. There was nothing that, we had nothing. And the family was down and out. Another family would take them in. And it was just a matter of food or a roof over our heads. That was called survival at that time. And we all worked so hard, but most of us came from really, really good families, which we're very proud of, which helps you over all of these hard times. And as time went on, things just, it just seemed like it took so long for the Depression, with the Dust Bowl on top of it, just seemed like one problem after another. It's when Roosevelt came in, he's the one that helped us through all of this. He helped us come through. He put in good programs like the WWII and CCCs for young boys who went into the CCs because they come from large families and they couldn't feed all of them. Can you hear me all right? Can you? That was the time where things started to pick up a little bit. And it just seemed like there's no end to what we had to endure, or I'm sure some of you experienced that. But now when things started to get better, we were really happy about that. And of course, like I said, Roosevelt put in all those good programs. He started helping feed people, and of course now the Dust Bowl was beginning to be over, and the Great Depression. We lived in a small town halfway between two large cities, and of course the trains were run at that time by coal and steam, or coal and water. And we had what they called a coal, I don't know what they call it, a coal or something there where the train stopped. When the trains would stop, the bums, they called them bums or hobos, but these were just men going from coast to coast looking for a decent job. They weren't really what you call hobos. They'd get off the train and they'd come to the door. They'd ask could they do something for maybe a sandwich or something to eat. I remember so well how many times my mother would make them an egg sandwich or whatever. That's about what we had at that time. Almost everybody had chickens. And they'd sit on the doorstep and they'd eat their sandwich. And they'd be so grateful. And they'd thank my mother. Then they'd get back on the train. They'd go to the cities had more industry, so it was easier. In the Middle West, it was farming and mostly, very little. So there wasn't jobs to offer them there, so they kept moving. But that was a very difficult time for them. And of course, now we're into the 1930s, and things are starting to get better. It's much better. But also we started worrying about Hitler. He was moving into all of the countries like Poland, especially when he got to Poland. I think that was in the late 39s. That was such a sad time because we were afraid. We'd seen what he was doing. He was just eating up every country. I remember my mother and father, how they feared what was happening, never thinking about what Japan was going to do to us. We used to save scrap metal to sell to Japan, never realizing that they're going to use that against us and would make their own material. It was an unbelievable time. My sister and I had been to, it was a Sunday, and my sister and I had been to a matinee. When we came home, our parents were sitting by the radio, very upset. And we said, well, what had happened? And they said, well, the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. I stood there, and I thought, I don't think I know where Pearl Harbor is. I think, we weren't sophisticated about the world at that time, but we sure found out in a hurry where Pearl Harbor was. And that was really a sad time in our life, because within weeks, all of our young boys, now we're just a small town, all of our young boys enlisted right away. And that took the heart out of our town. You can't believe what it's like when all the men leave. Well, my uncle decided to leave too. He was older, but he enlisted. And he was a rural mail carrier. If you know what rural mail carriers are, they take mail out into the country. Well, at that time there was no electric and no power out into the country. And when my uncle enlisted, they gave that job to my mother. Well, that was unheard of, a woman doing that job, especially in those severe winters. And the farmers used to watch for her. They kind of timed her. If she didn't show up in time, they'd come looking for her on a horse or tractor or something. They wanted to make sure she wasn't stuck. But I call her the very first Rosie, because that was right, the war was just declared, and that happened right away. That was so unbelievable. It had a strong mother. That was so unbelievable. I think it was federal. I believe that was federal at the time. So that was unbelievable for a woman to take on that role. But this is what happened. This is what women did. After the boys left, what are the girls going to hang around for if the boys leave? So we all started thinking about going to Seattle. So as soon as school was out, my sister and girlfriend and I packed up, and we thought, well, we'll go to Seattle for the summer. That would be a lot of fun. But we loved it. We stayed out through the war. We all became Rosie Riveters. They take it downtown in Seattle, and they put a sheet of metal in a vise, and they teach us how to drill holes, and then they teach us how to rivet. And the buck, you always go ahead, you're a bucker of the rivets at first. And they give us about 2 weeks training. Then into the factory you go. Here you are working on these huge bombers. Here we are, young, naive kids. I can remember my job was crawling inside the wings. I was a bucker. I had to snake in and out of the ribs of these wings. I look back on it now and I said, how did I do it? I said, I can't imagine. Anybody in there would be so claustrophobic. But I guess that comes from youth. I mean, you don't think these things, you just do them. But after a while, of course, I became a riveter then. And I think I became a very good riveter, in my opinion. I felt like I was a very good one. But these women were amazing. Up until 1941, it was a man's world. They didn't realize how great the American women was, how capable they were. And we sure showed them, didn't we? Hitler had said he wouldn't have any trouble defeating America because American women couldn't produce. He said we were soft and spoiled. He said we spent too much money on cosmetics and things like that. So I think we showed Hitler what American women were made of. Pretty proud of that. And I'm just so proud of what the women have done since then. They've opened a lot of doors. I'm really proud of them. When we went to work, there would be women. One woman in particular, there was more than one I got to know well. She was a Gold Star mother. She had lost her son. She didn't quit working because she lost her son. She said, I don't want another mother to lose a son because he doesn't have the equipment he needs. And I thought that's an outstanding woman. I said, this is the way the women were. We all pulled together. It wasn't my job or your job. It was our job. We just need to make the material and the equipment our men needed to win the war. And we really dug in and did it right. And of course, there was a lot more of the widows. A lot of women lost their husbands. And they stayed right in there, hung right in, and did what they had to do too. It's so amazing to watch what they did. Like I said, it wasn't my job or your job, it was our job. Somebody wrote, I don't know who wrote this, but he said, Rosie the Riveter was the most successful tool in American history. And I thought that, I don't know who wrote that, but I thought that was true. I mean, what the women did, I have friends in the shipyards in California. They were welders, most of them. In fact, we're all going to France for D-Day together. And I said, it's amazing because of inspectors, we had to have everything inspected. Inspectors said, I can always tell when a woman does the well, it's neat. But it's the same way with the rivets. If you didn't do a good job, you have to take them out. And I wasn't long, I was a bucker. You're always a bucker to start with. But then if you get good way, you can become a riveter. Of course, you make more money too. Now, instead of being on the inside of the wing, you're on the outside working, which also makes it nice. So that was always nice. But I had the opportunity. Somebody asked me today about the men in the factory. There was a lot of men. I think maybe the men outnumbered the women, I'm not sure. But they were mostly because either that they couldn't pass the physical or that they're important. It was more important that they were there than be in the military. But the one man I worked with, I never forgot, he was from Iowa. Of course, we were from all over the country. It wasn't just one particular area. And I worked with him on and off, even though he made me, even though I was riveted already, he made me a much better one. And when they'd have a special job, sometimes, a couple times, they took us out on the airport or worked on a plane that the president flew in. And it was a job that the engineers had modified, and we had to wait to, put it on the plane. And that was kind of interesting for a while, but it got very boring, because they had to sit and wait so long for what the engineers were going to do. But I never forgot that guy. I wish I'd have followed through and known where he went or what happened to him. He made me such a much better riveter. And he was such a nice guy. He played tricks on me, like you hear what the men did to the women when they went into the factories. We used to play tricks on me. He'd send me to the tool crib for something stupid when I'd go ask for it. They thought that was so funny, they really laughed. And I'm sure others experienced that too. But that was just the way of life at the time. And I'm just very proud of what the women did, what they achieved. They did everything. They built ships, they built airplanes, they built tanks. Many worked in very dangerous ammunition factories. I don't think there was a thing. And I've met so many women that worked in these different factories. And it's so much fun, talking to them, and listening to their stories. They were amazing women, and I'm very proud that I'm one of them. And I'm so happy that I'm still able to get around. So many of them now they just don't have anything left. They're just not well enough to go out and do things. So it's a blessing when you have good health. So I see that with our men too. I met this cute sailor on the dance floor in 1944, and boy could he dance. And I said, we married in 1945, Roosevelt had just died, and we were so afraid because we had Europe and Japan on the run, and we didn't know anything about Truman because it just kept him in the dark all the time. And now Roosevelt died, and it's kind of like changing horses in mid-spring. We thought, what's going to happen now? But it followed through. It wasn't long before the war was over, which was a blessing. That was really nice. Thankful for that. But one of the things that I'm very proud of is, I don't know whether anybody of you know who Hal Arnold is, but he was the five-star general from, it was the Army Air then, well, we didn't have Air Force yet. He'd come into the plants and he'd walk among us, talk to us, shake our hands, and we would just be so proud of that. And, at the time we were young and naive, I didn't realize how important he was. But now they said, you met Hal Arnold? I said, yeah, but it didn't mean anything to me at the time, but I have books, he's been on Time magazine and different things, and very, very important. And when the Air Force was formed, he was a five-star general for that, so he had a career of five-star general in 2 Air Forces, which was quite amazing, I thought. Really good. And I've met so many of these nice people that built the planes and the ships and everything. I'm just so proud of all of them. Just so many things. One thought just leads to another. When you start these things, it's hard to bring up 75 years of memory, of what you did and what you didn't do. I just know that I'm so proud of what the women, I think we opened doors, but boy, you women carried it through, and I'm so proud of that. Look what the women are doing today. And the same way with equal pay, I fought for that because we didn't, even though we were doing the same job as the men, we didn't get near as much money. And so I fought for that for women. If you're doing the same job, why don't you get the same pay? And I think that's important. We're not all the way there yet. I think Obama said we're 90%, but I don't think so. I don't think we're even 90% yet. Some jobs are, some people pay well, but most of them don't. They figure if you're women, you're not as worth as a man, even though you're doing the same job. So you still got to fight that. Not true. I see you shaking your head. It's true. Yeah. So many things. There's many things I wanted to talk about and tell you. You just can't bring up everything that's going on in all those years. I had a flight on B-17 just 2 years ago, and that was the first time I'd been in one. I built a lot of them, but I'd never been on the inside of one. And I was amazed. They're so small on the inside. And you know who Harry Connick is? He's that singer. Well, I was on his show, and he played the tail gunner in the Memphis Belle movie. And I said, Harry, how did you ever get in that tail gunner position? And he just laughed. He started telling me all about it. But now there might be somebody here that knows. I'm a B-17. Anybody from B-17s here? Anybody at all that has an experience? I was just told, I don't know if it's true or not, I was told that when the tail gunner would get in that position, he's way out there, with where he could be shot off the whole tail. I heard that they tied a rope to their leg in case the tail was shot off, they could still bring you back into the plane. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. I wish I could find out. Chris, you find that out for me, will you? Yeah, I thought that was so interesting, really interesting. And I've had such beautiful honors since I've been running around doing all these things. If you look at my posters, you'll see our congressmen we've gotten 2 Rosie and Riveter National Days, and our one is up for vote right now to get this year's. But they've introduced Congressional Gold Medal for Rosie and Riveter. Yeah. And I just love that. Yeah. I know those of you who have had to deal with Washington, you know how hard it is or how difficult it is to get these things passed. Now with that bill, we need 2/3 of the House and Senate to get this bill passed. And boy, that takes a lot of work. And now it's going to be reintroduced because with all that was going on last year, it didn't pass. We're hoping it would pass before the year ends, but I just hope I don't have to write all those letters again. I told Senator Casey, I was down with Senator Casey a couple times, and I said, I know why you gave us this day. You're just getting sick and tired of hearing from me. He just laughed. He's a nice man. He does a lot for us. And our 2 congressmen are Republicans. The 2 of them, Mike Fitzpatrick and his brother Brian is the new one in our area now. And they just work really good to give us our day. And I think that's nice. Our veterans will tell us that had it not been for the women, they couldn't have won the war. And I think that's true. And especially our World War II veterans, like I said, are there any World War II veterans here? How about Rosies? Are there any Rosies here? Me? But isn't it sad? I mean, now I've been invited to Harrisburg next Monday to be honored, Rosie and Riveter. That's the second time they've invited me to Harrisburg, the Capitol building. That makes me so proud. And I said, it's so sad because there's just not Rosies that aren't well enough to go with me and do things. I don't know how many times I've gone to Washington and I wanted them to go with me, but none of them are just feeling that they're capable of doing it. And so that makes me feel bad because I'd sure like to see them, more benefit what we're doing for them, working, because they're all over our country. There's not just our area. But like I said, I'm really proud of what the women did. So much is going on. So I don't know whether I should tell this. I'm going to tell it. I was speaking at a ladies' club one day, and the lady said to me, well, what did you women do when the war was over? Did you just go back into the kitchen? And I said, yeah, and the bedroom. That's where all these baby boomers go. I told her baby boomers, But the war was over and everybody's coming home. And so the hospitals couldn't even keep up with the amount of babies that were being born that first year. But that's life, right? I thought, I shouldn't say that, but I did. What did I do with my card? Got a couple other things I wanted to tell you. Am I running out of time? One of the things that I heard, of course I'm so partial to the B-17, I had been writing everywhere since I started back in the 80s. It started when my son said to me, my children were out of college already at this time, and my son said, Mom, I didn't remember you worked with the prisoners of war, the Italian prisoners of war. And I said, yeah. I said, when your father was transferred, he was transferred to another naval base, and the Army Engineers, and it was an Army Engineer base, and so I went right to work for them. And they had a compound with the Italian prisoners of war. And they used to come in and work with us because it wasn't lightweight material. We were, packaging things to send overseas for reconstruction, and we bombed all the bridges, now we're building them up, and things like that. So they used to come in and they had to stop and just work with us. But most of them could speak a little bit of English. But that was funny. They said, you American women are so fresh. And I said, I guess we were. But that was a nice time. It was a different time, a time I really remember. He asked me about it, and all of a sudden they started asking me questions. And I thought, I've got to write this down, because even my children don't know what we went through during World War II, because, you don't talk about it. We're so busy raising our family, we don't talk about it. And so that's how I started. I started writing to everybody and anybody who would listen to me. And all of a sudden, one of our local papers picked up on it, and it just snowballed. I've been all over, and it's just really nice. I've met the nicest people. I've got coins, challenge coins from the General of the Air Force, one from the Secretary of the Air Force, things like that I wouldn't have gotten if I sat home in my rocking chair, right? So that was nice. I like that. I like that a lot. And one of the things they did that I'll never get over, and I think was absolutely beautiful, when the Air Force invited me down to Kennedy, it was Patrick's Air Force Base. That was for the heavy-duty rocket, the launch when they had it in February. Well, they took me right up as close as we could get to the rocket launch, and we could see almost everything that was going on. It was absolutely amazing. And then they gave us a 3-hour private tour of Cape Canaveral. And you live a life and you never imagine that you get to see these things. And it's all simply because I started writing letters. And that was so amazing. Now I'm invited back again this year. I'm not sure, I think it's in September. But like I said, I looked down, there's all these beautiful people protecting us, and they weren't even as old as like I said, they weren't born yet when I was building these airplanes. Amazing. Time goes by, doesn't it? Time goes by. I went to, I guess it must have been 2015, I got a call from the Washington Women in Trades, this is out in Seattle, and they put out a calendar every year, and they call it the Legacy of Rosie the Riveter. And they called me and tell me that I was going to be marked on their calendar. Of course, and they did I want to come to the release, and of course, I jumped on the first plane. It was so funny, when we were on the plane, I was talking to the man next to me, and we were talking about where we were going, what we were doing. After he heard my story, went and told the stewardess. Well, then they made a big thing of it on the plane, the pilots and all wouldn't let me out, they down, what have you. And he said, so you're a calendar girl now. I said, yeah, but I'm not the centerfold anymore. I didn't tell him I never was, but I don't really know. There's so many things that goes on, and just so many things to think about. One of the things I didn't tell you is I come from a pioneer family. My great-grandparents pioneered into what was called the Dakota Territory at that time. And I still, up until last year, I still had one surviving aunt from our pioneer family. And when I go back to see that, they've got one little cemetery there. It looks just like Boot Hill. It's so old, you can't even read what's on the stones. And when they moved into the Dakota Territory, I wondered why did they pick that? They came from Austria. Why did they pick the barren land out in the Midwest? And I heard that the railroad was supposed to go through. It started from Duluth and was going to go to Oregon, and they got as far as North Dakota, ran out of money. In the meantime, they bought up all that land. So now in order to do something with this land, they hired an advertising agency. And so they started going after the people that had just gotten here, or like the Norwegians, or people, whoever was coming here. They started telling them about the beautiful sunset and the waving ever waves of gray. They didn't tell them they froze their butt off in the winter and in the summer, you know. But they were hardy people. They built sod houses, and that's the way they lived. So, straw bed, sod house, I can't even imagine it. Can't even imagine it. So I did come from tough stock. That was my mother, she was something else. So I guess this is another one I have to tell you. When we were kids, we had nothing. My father didn't own the farm, but we lived there. I guess he worked there for someone else, I'm not sure, I was a small. But we had nothing to entertain us. We didn't even have books. But my father was a storyteller, he always was all his life. So he used to sit around the stove at night, and he'd always tell us stories. And all the stories usually ended up about the man in the moon. Whoever imagined in our wildest dreams that someday we'd put a man on the moon? And you know, I walked in Veterans Day Parade in New York 2 years in a row now, and Buzz Aldrin was the Grand Master of the first one. And when I was down in Florida, I got to kiss Winston Scott. He had walked in space 3 times. I said, oh, if I could just tell my father could see me now. You know, some things you remember. But that's our life. That's our life. I know there's a lot of things that I am not telling or forget about, but I think you've heard enough from me. And hi, Crystal.
Let me ask you a question. Hey, back in your time, 90-some years old was really not expected whatsoever. Did you think you'd live this long and be so strong?
That's what they asked me when I was on a Connick show. He said to me, did you ever think you'd be such an icon? I said, we didn't think of anything like that. We just survived, you know, it's just a matter of survival. No, I don't think about age. I think when my time is ready, life doesn't owe me a thing. I was married almost 70 years before I lost my husband. We had a good life, got good children. What else could I ask for, you know? So when my time comes, no, they don't need to shed any tears. No.
Well, we're going to have to... Hello? Cliff? Where's the Cliff? We'll have more. Hello? Yeah, you got it. Red light? Yeah.
Hello. Okay, we're going to have some more questions and answers.
I have one more.
But first, we want to just say thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Here's a question. Got any more stories?
I got another story. It's a cute one. But my husband, after we were married, my husband got a leave, and it wasn't too long before the war was over, but now we came to the west, to the East Coast, and I'd always lived on the west, and I'd never been east before. So when we were going back, it takes like 2 days and a night, I think, to go, because most of them are troop trains that you're riding on. And when we got halfway across the country going back, VE Day was declared. That's victory in Europe, if you're familiar with that. Well, every time we'd stop, or the train would stop, people would be there to meet us, and they'd bring liquor to them. That was like 90% veterans. And they'd bring liquor to the trains and what have you. By the time we got back to Washington, we had some sick pups on that train. And they were happy that it was to go down. That was the end of Europe. That's it. That's it.
All right, we got some questions. I get the mic, I'll ask the first one. I have heard that the United States went to great pains to camouflage the Boeing plans. Was yours camouflaged?
No, the 5,000 we built, we only got the plane. That was the 5,000 B-17 we built since Pearl Harbor, and that was May of 1944. And you'll see the pictures on it. The Army camouflaged everything. They didn't think they'd let it go that way, but they said for morale purposes they were going to let it fly because all of our names are on it. And then we heard later that the men fought over, the pilots fought over who was going to get to fly it. And then the historian showed me after the war that they couldn't save it, they tried to save it as a memorial. Historian sent me a picture, here it is in the scrapyard in Kingsman, Arizona, and it still has all of our names on it. That's amazing.
Who else? Oh my God, way back there. Here comes Laura. Rosie Jr.
Aren't there any Rosies here?
Not real ones.
Not real ones?
But there are a lot of lookalikes.
Could you tell me approximately how long was your work shift when you reported to work? And if you remember, how much did you earn on an hourly basis?
Would you repeat that for me?
Hourly
How
wage.
much money did you make?
What did they pay you?
How long was your shift?
How long were our shifts?
How long your work shift?
Yeah, we usually worked 8 hours a day, but if we needed us to work on holidays or weekends, we did. I remember working Thanksgiving Day, but I didn't work Christmas Day, I don't remember that. But you know, we were duty bound, we were very duty bound, whatever they needed, we did. And we were all in the same thing together, it wasn't my job or your job. We did what had to be done, and whatever the men needed, I said, we supplied it.
How many of them were you? Or how many of you were there?
Oh, God, there's millions of women. Rosies were coming all sizes and shapes. Well, one Rosie, because I did riveting on airplanes, she said, I wasn't a Rosie. She made the engine for the plane. I said, you're just as much a part of that plane as I am.
Yeah.
Another lady said, I wasn't a Rosie. She said, I only made anchor chains for the Navy. I said, how could the Navy function without anchor chains? That's not, don't realize that they fall under that umbrella.
Kirk, this gentleman also asked if she remembered her hourly wages.
Remember your hourly wage?
I think we started at 93 cents an hour. And that was big bucks. I think the highest was probably 97. But when I went for the Army Engineers, I saved my paperwork from that, and I started at 83 cents an hour. I think that was a lot of money. I think the shipyard workers made more money than we did. But their job was harder, the shipyard workers, but their job was harder than ours. Yeah, Sally.
And the lady down front?
When you went back to the kitchen and the bedroom, did you miss the work?
Did I miss it? Work? No, because it was a whole different thing. When the war was over, my husband worked for Westinghouse before the war, and so Westinghouse was very good to their employees, and they, he had a job to come home to, which most of them didn't. Rosie's, when the war was over, they just slammed the doors, and Rosie's were out on the street. They had no income, a lot of them didn't have husbands anymore, and that was very difficult for them. But when we came home, it was hard after the war, real hard, because now all of these companies were making military equipment. Now they started to retool, so they didn't need the men right away. So there were so many strikes. I think Westinghouse went on 3 strikes in the first year or 2. And so that's why I went to Riveter during the Korean War too, but it wasn't because I was flying the flag, I was earning money, we needed money,
I'm not sure how to ask this, but with all the ladies in town, were there any men who just thought they died and went to heaven?
That did what?
With all the ladies in town.
Yeah.
Were there any men in town who thought they might have gone to heaven with all this?
I don't know about that.
Did you see any men? I mean, was there any people in town, or just the Rosies, or?
What do you mean? At Boeing, you mean?
Yeah, in
Seattle.
Yeah.
Well, no, that was a military town. That was fun. I met my husband on the dance floor there in 1944. And we were both good dancers. In fact, we won contests at the time with Jitterbug, we were Jitterbugs. And that was great. We danced our way through life. We loved to dance. And it was a really nice thing. But no, they treated the military men, wherever I was, they treated the military men really great. It was nice. I think it was really nice.
Yeah.
And us too, we were treated, you know, it was a different time in life. You didn't worry about walking the street.
Yeah.
One of the things we did, wherever we'd see us in Seattle, wherever we'd see a line, it didn't matter what it was, we'd get in line. Because whatever it was 2 packs of cigarettes or chocolate bar, we knew we could trade it for something that somebody else got. So no matter what the line, we just get in line. One of the things I remember so well is transportation. We didn't live too far from the Boeing plant, but when the buses would get down to where we were, they were loaded. And so they just pushed us, they just packed us on the bus. And one day the bus was going by and the man had this rubber thing. He had his lunch bucket sticking out the door. That's how packed they did with the bus. But that was the way of life then.
How long did it take you to make one airplane?
What did they say?
How long did it take to make an airplane? How many hours were put in to make, listen, how many airplanes came out of the factory every day?
Oh, I don't know every day. We made 5,000 since the beginning, Pearl Harbor, until the war was over, and our plant alone. Boeing himself made 12,000, but there was other plants. I wrote to the historian, I said, do you think I had rivets in Enola Gay? And he said it was possible, and I thought, oh wow, that's great. Then I found out it was made either in Wichita or Omaha. My saying.
5,000 from your plant during the war?
Yeah. No,
Roughly 4 years.
yeah, well, see now that this is 17s, they started building B-29s now in the 1944, I think it was late 1944, and we started building the B-29s. And I didn't like the B-29 near as well as the B-17. In fact, the lady that wrote my article in the paper, she said she called it my love affair with my B-17. Yeah. And I liked the B-17.
So if you do the math, that's
Did I ask
4
you
years,
something?
5,000 planes. That's a lot of planes every day.
You have to forgive me, my ears are going.
Thank you for telling your story. My question is, do you remember interacting with the Women's Auxiliary Corps, the Waves, WACs, or the WASPs? The women who flew the planes, you know, from the plants?
Try again.
So Steph's question is whether she remembers interacting with the Waves, the WASPs, the WACs, or the auxiliary.
Interacting at all with the Waves and the Wasp?
Oh yeah, we used to go dancing with them at night. We knew a lot of them. I mean, because they all didn't work in Boeing. They worked at the different Army bases. But we knew a lot of them. They all come to the Servicemen Center. They were nice women. We stayed in touch with quite a few after the war. It was nice. One of the things that I don't know if you're familiar with the WASP. They're the ones that they were regular pilots before they joined the Air, but they were civil service. They didn't include them as military. And they're the ones, they used to ferry our planes, they used to fly those big planes. And it was so funny because Cap Arnold said when they brought that Corps up, he said he was really reluctant about these petite young women flying these big bombers. But after a while, he said they're every bit as good as the men. He said the only problem we have with that is that the parachutes are made for men and they're much too big for these petite young flyers.
Christian? Quick comment.
Addressing how many airplanes were built, I do know statistically from Willow Run in Michigan at the Ford plant, they were putting out a B-24 every 45 minutes.
Out of Willow Run? They made B-24 every 45 minutes. Henry Ford.
Your mic.
Did you turn it off? I didn't know light. No light.
Kirk, it's you.
I think maybe Cliff cut Kirk off. Operator error.
I think the battery died. Wait a minute, it just came back on. Hello.
No.
Next.
Don't.
Speak up. It'll work for you.
close because I want to make sure you hear me. I just want to thank you because, well, first of all, the men and women of World War II saved the free world, so thank you for that. But also, as a woman, how you opened doors, because I got to be a police officer because of you opening doors, and now I work for the Attorney General as a supervisor, and I make more than all the men in my unit. So, thank you.
When she commented about that, we had a celebration in New York at the Hotel New Yorker last year, they had the celebration in New York. And after I said a few words, a lady out of the audience came up to me and she said, "Had it not been for you women, I wouldn't be a doctor today." And you know, I've never forgotten that. It just made me feel so proud. Because we didn't know, at the time we were doing this, we didn't know how many doors it was going to open. But it certainly has. When I looked at Washington after the election, I went, way!
Well, Rosie, oh, another one.
You have to forgive my hearing.
You said you went back during the Korean War to Riveter. What did you work on and how many years did you work there?
You said you went back during the Korean War to do some more riveting?
I worked during the Korean War, yes. I worked in Boeing, not Boeing, it was Fleet Wings or Kaisers in Bristol, Pennsylvania, and not in Seattle. And that was what I was close to. And it was so funny because I think it was the F4 we were working on. It was just a little tail. And I'm so used to these huge bombers, and I look at it. But I needed the money. That's we were there. We had small children, and times were really rough. So it was a rough time. So it was rougher after the war sometimes.
Okay. May.
I'm done?
You're a delight. We're not done. It's something very important. Very important. What?
No, my hearing didn't go because of my rheumatism. It's just old age.
Nobody goes out of here unpunished. So, you're about to join a very select group of people who have spoken to us. A couple of them here in the room already. You are now the proud recipient of the World War II Round Table Mug. Before I tell everybody, thank you for coming and remember the helmet committee. If everybody with red polka dots, runaway polka dots would like to come up and surround you for a picture, would that be okay?
Oh, yeah, and I'd like to come up and see my posters.
Yeah, come on now, see your posters.
That's my bragging point because this is so many of the people I've just met this past year, and I call that my bragging poster. But these are my World War II.
All right. Come on down, polka dot kids.
Am I done?
Are you done? Are you done?